what is an impacted tenant? How is it? To be regarded as an impacted tenant, what are the criteria? And what it is, and I'll very quickly go through it and the proof and the negotiations around this. To be regarded as an impacted tenant, a household needs to demonstrate that they are impacted by COVID-19. So one or more rent-paying members of the household have lost employment or income, so it can be a reduction in employment or income, or simply they've been stood down, or through business closures. Or one or more rent-paying members of a household have had to stop working or reduce their hours due to their own personal illness with COVID, or due to their care responsibilities for a household member or a close family member. So I'll come back to the rent-paying issue in a minute, because it's the big question that I get as soon as I start saying this. People say, oh, and I'll come back. So hang on. So when those factors are in play, looking at the household income, inclusive of any government assistance. So it's inclusive of JobKeeper or JobSeeker, or, so it's the household income inclusive of that. If it is reduced by 25% or more, then they are regarded under the new legislation for residential tenancies during the COVID period that went live on the 15th of April as an impacted tenant. Let me go back to one or more rent-paying members. Now, it's not necessarily about who is on the lease. So there might be a family in a property, and one or other of the adults are on the lease. The other one is down there as an approved occupant. So they're still contributing to the rent, and particularly if that was calculated in the time of actually working through when they got the tenancy. Even adult children can be regarded as rent-paying members of a household. So if they're bringing in income, then they are rent-paying members of a household, of what's coming into that household. So, obviously there's a lot of discussion, and every single situation is going to be different. Now, think about the words that came out of the legislation there. To be regarded as an impacted tenant, a household needs to demonstrate that they are impacted by COVID-19. Not just say, hey, I'm affected by COVID-19, demonstrate. So they need to provide some proof. So they need to provide the agent, the landlord, with evidence of that impact on their ability to pay their rent. So such documentary evidence should include the original household income prior to COVID, the change in circumstances due to COVID, and how it's impacted the household income. So that could be, something from their employer or past employer saying that they've been stood down, or they're out of work, or or their hours have been cut down. So there's proof on how they've been affected. They should put forward the rent payment that they would be able to meet under the new household income. So, showing how, and property managers can calculate that quite easily. And they also need to put in any income support being received from government or from elsewhere. So, and if they're not receiving, any income support, you'd have to be asking the question of why. Had they applied for it? Are they eligible? And maybe push them back down that path. And so it's all about, and Fair Trading are quite adamant in pushing back in terms of it's about negotiation. And, they're on their website, they talk a lot about using the New South Wales Fair Trading Dispute Resolution Service. So it's there. It's not new. It's always been there. It's kind of the step before it gets to NCAT. So whilst they can't give orders, or binding orders, it's certainly a negotiation process, okay? So, and if it all fails, they're obviously then, it's most likely off to NCAT for people. But, that's where it's standing. So that negotiation where both the landlord and the tenant need to come to the table with their financial situation in terms of their reliance on, from a landlord's perspective, their reliance on the financial income from the rent to pay their mortgage or other expenses, or, where that fits into it. Any negotiations that the landlord has had with their in relation to repaying their mortgage payments. They may, now the tenant's nominated what they're willing to pay, the landlord needs to nominate what they're willing to accept, and then clarify that. Then also clarify their position on land tax. Remember, there's a whole issue about, if a landlord is paying land tax, then it's 25% discount on that, so it's 25 or reduction in that. then it's 20. That needs to be passed on. Only that discount is given if it is passed on to the tenant. Well, when it comes down to it, I think it was announced by government at one point, and that only 16% of residential landlords actually pay land tax. So, there's 84% of landlords out there who can't give that based on any land tax relief that's being offered by the government. So there's a whole range of issues here. And the first place to go for this is go to the Fair Trading website. They've got a couple of great flow charts on there that absolutely go into detail for the landlord and for the tenant on what it is. And it comes down to, the 60-day not being able to even issue any termination notice for any reason, and then what happens after that. So if you're not an impacted tenant, so if you're dealing with not an impacted tenant, then none of this comes into play. It is about the tenant being classified as an impacted tenant. So just remember that when you're doing the negotiations and work it out that way. So, it is quite an unsettling period as we all need to work out what on earth it is that we're actually doing.